Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear. I'm joined today by my other two hosts.
I'm May, also known as Magic.
And
Stu. Welcome to the show.
All right, so we've got a sullen episode today. We're going to talk about what if a mage loses all those precious memories. Better yet, what if the mage causes the other mage to lose all of their precious memories? They just go into those dark depths of that abyss, memories just being washed and wiped away. What mechanic would cause such a thing to occur?
Nothing better to represent it than Mill.
There we go.
I'm already a little unsettled by how you've introduced this episode, but I think it's appropriate considering what Mill kind of, like you say, what it represents for the mage or the mages. And we're going to discuss some strategy today up and down the board, and this is going to be exciting. And as you can tell by the mood, we're kind of keeping it a little on the somber side to reflect what we're going to discuss today.
But before we get all sullen and upset, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube. We're going to enjoy our libations of the show.
I'm excited for my beer today, Anthony. What are you guys drinking over there, May? That drink looks wonderful and colourful. Tell us about it.
All right, so this time I actually prepared a rhubarb mule where I have homemade rhubarb jam that I made, and then I took a little scoop of it, added it into some ginger beer, got some freshly ground ginger, some fresh lime pulp, squeezed the fresh lime, and then stirred it all up with like 4 shots of vodka. So
yeah, that sounds way better than what we did. We just went to the store and bought cans.
I'm gonna put it out there right now. That rhubarb jam better make its way down to CubeCon, okay? Just saying, or up to CubeCon.
I was just thinking too. The whole time you're talking about rhubarb, I'm like, oh my god, you know what I'd like? Marmalade.
I like marmalade.
That would be dope.
What you got today?
All right, I've got a Lagunitas IPA India Pale Ale. How about yourself?
I have got myself a hidden pipe coffee porter from the Raleigh Brewing Company, and this is like, I'm on a big kick for this right now. It's delicious.
All right, let's crack them open. All right, so this is going to be a combo episode, and we're going to talk about both mill and self-mill as a discussion. Core element of this is, mill has its 1994 antiquities background, and we'll talk about that further. But the idea is more folklorish, right? It's more storytelling. It's the mage having their memory erased or choosing to lose their fondest memories, right? And it's a very risky type of strategy on both spectrums.
I would call it a pretty advanced play style.
Extremely. A good way to set the tone for this, would you mind kicking us off with this wonderful quote we have here?
So we have a quote, and it goes as such. Yea, from the table of my memory, I'll wipe away all trivial fond records, all sores of books, all forms, all pleasures past, that youth and observation copied there, and thy commandment all alone shall live within the book and volume of my brain, unmixed with baser matter.
The late, great William Shakespeare.
Good old Billy Shakes.
From Hamlet.
Hamlet.
Which is fantastic and depressing. All right, so May, would you mind taking off this, the card that really set the name comes from somewhere, right? Give us a little bit of origin here, if you would, please.
Sure. So Mill actually started from the card called Millstone, which is an artifact, 2 cost. You could pay 2, tap it, and target player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into the graveyard. I'll note that the version that you have has flavor text that's particularly nice too. Minds, like mountains, are never so grand or mighty that they can't be reduced to dust.
That's superb.
Which really sets that tone of what we're talking about, like the skill level involved. And as we mentioned before, this first was introduced in 1994 with Antiquities. The version that I have in the show notes is the eroded or Oracle text version from M14. I thought it would read a little cleaner, but that idea is very complex. Like Mill is kind of like when we talked about during our Exile episode. It's a very tricky strategy, right? You gotta give up cards to gain. It's a risk reward type of scenario, and it's very challenging. May, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. It's kind of sad that we lost the archive of Magic the Gathering's articles and etc. because there was an article a while ago that was covered by Ristic Study. Great YouTuber, by the way.
Yes.
But specifically talking about what milling represents, and I'm pretty sure Spice AVRAC also did a cover on this. And what does it mean to lose cards from the library as opposed to lose cards from your hand? And it's complex when you're thinking about it in terms of flavor, because the flavor of the game is that the cards in your hand is your short-term, your immediate memory. And when that's discarded, then you're losing your short-term memory. But when you lose cards from the top of your deck, you're losing your long-term memory. It represents your spells and experiences of your deck as a planeswalker, and losing that as a resource either by your own fruition as reckless pursuit of power or as a loss from another mage. It is a representation of long-term memories fading away. Insert burning memory motif here.
I guess the best way I would sum this up is I put a poll out on Twitter before we even began this episode, and I wanted to get the general populace an idea, and I didn't get a lot of, I got like 25 input votes or whatever, but the gist was, which one do you prefer? Mill, self-mill, or get all that out of here? And it was self-mill that really people gravitated to, because there's a lot of reasons, and we're gonna put those in two silos as we talk about this. But in order to do that, we're gonna carry you into another card that's a famous one, and Stu's gonna talk about this combination that really got a name for this one, because as I researched this, there was an is it, and correct me audience if I'm incorrect, I was really trying to find if there was a top deck that's ever been designed with the mill as its central strategy. And I read some articles that I really couldn't figure out if it was completely accurate, but apparently there was one that was an is it grindy deck that did win at one point. But this is a strategy that has some definitely emotional connection from a player standpoint.
Yeah, so, the card that Anthony's referring to is Brain Freeze, which is a 1 colorless, 1 blue instant. A target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, and it has Storm. And this card is part of a pretty bananas win con with another card, Underworld Breach, which is a enchantment for 1 and a red, and basically cards in your graveyard get escape until end of turn, or at end of turn you sacrifice it. So basically, job is just to brain freeze yourself until you have enough cards in your graveyard to just brain freeze your opponent's entire deck. And typically the easy way to do this is with, like I say, brain freeze, Underworld Breach, and one of either Black Lotus or Lion's Eye Diamond, because you can just bring them back just for the escape cost because they're 0. So you just basically brain freeze yourself like 5-6 times, and it doesn't matter how many cards you've got in your library, and then you just brain freeze your opponent that.
Which is really interesting.
And that's is it, right? So Underworld Breach is red, brain freeze is blue, so there's your is it deck? Question mark?
It's not the one that actually carried all the way to the finish. But what's fascinating about this idea is tying those two ideas of the two mages dwindling their memories off at all cost into the blinded eternities.
That is one mage saying, I'm happy to give up all my memories in order to rob you of yours.
Correct. And it's just a really interesting viewpoint. May, you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I actually really appreciate that flavor too, because in a way it makes sense that a lot of milling tends to lie in either like that Grixis or that Sultai combination, where we see a lot of this control over information, power over people's minds and Dimir. And since Dimir is like the main home for mill, but since that Dimir portion also feeds into that power at any cost, self-mill I see as that extension of flavor of the cost of being your humanity, your memories, etc. The things that you have had that you are giving up for the now power.
Yeah. You could even argue like the greatness at any cost, right? That's what are you willing to sacrifice for your greatness? You're willing to sacrifice, certainly in black, you're willing to sacrifice your life. I'm willing to sacrifice my memories, like anything to...
And you're washing away your thoughts, which really correlates to the actual play style, exactly what it demands of you as a player.
Very high risk.
When you're pushing those cards off the top of your library with no knowledge and turning them over for the first time now in your graveyard, you've now just learned the same information as your opponent, and maybe it's not what you intended to go into that yard.
It's actually not. I would argue that you've now given your opponent much greater information. You already knew what was in your deck. Your opponent did not. So now you're giving them full info to what you're trying to do.
That's when you do it to yourself. But when you do it to your opponent, you're now revealing information. And it does have an emotional connection on both sides. Again, I said there's not a lot of favoritism from the community, generally speaking, especially like things like we don't talk a great deal here, like Commander, for example. One of the things that you'll get the most groans from is when a player sits down and says, hello, everyone, I just built a amazing mill deck. And you can just hear the groans bursting from the table. The subtleties have occurred.
Yeah, I mean, one of the members of our group, he has a mill deck, basically. That was Kevin's Wizards, Mono Blue Wizards deck. That was the strategy. And when I was very new to Magic, I absolutely despised the fact that he was forcing me to put cards in my graveyard from my library. Like, how dare you? My cards are sitting there. They're not yours to do anything with. Like, it was anxiety inducing. Like, I hated it. And nowadays I can appreciate it more, but this kind of goes back to where it can be kind of an advanced strategy, certainly on the self side, because it's difficult sometimes seeing your resources go away, or at least move.
Which leads us into another wonderful quote here from H.P. Lovecraft. The process of delving into the black abyss is, to me, the keenest form of fascination. That's a really selling individual.
Mm-hmm. The books,
writing. The books
don't lie.
Not a great individual, but his writing is masterclass. Mm-hmm. I mean, you want to lose some sleep overnight, read a little bit of H.P. Lovecraft before you close your eyes at night. It won't fare thee well. So kind of the focus of this subsection is going to be mill, as we're talking about. We'll later get to the self-mill portion, but we're really going to have a centric focus on May's cube, because she does support a mill strategy. And I've got broken out, and it'll be included in the show notes, along with the images as we talk about the very specific cards. And May did, when we were pre-gaming, did mention there is no way possible that we could ever talk about all the primary, secondary, and tertiary mill cards and components involved with the strategy.
No, there's just too many.
There's
We'd be here all day.
Much. You're interested, I'll be glad to take it in other layers. But for now, we're going to talk about the components that we have chosen to include in our two environments and the reasons why we have chosen to put those in our environments. Well, this one's going to be the Fae Cube.
And I'll say that the fact that we're not going to do that is actually, it does speak to just the volume of support that mill has as an archetype, right? You can do it with spells, you can do it with artifacts, you can do it with creatures. There's all kinds of different pros and cons from doing so. So I think that really does, as I've grown to enjoy it, it's a great consideration for a cube.
May, I've actually got some bullet points I've written out. Would you mind taking those on, please, and kind of work our way through these?
So there's a lot of considerations and et cetera to talk about when it comes to mill, putting it into your cube and how it's going to affect your players and the types of things that you're supporting and how that translates into whether or not people are choosing self-mill or milling your opponent. Because at its core, mill can be a parasitic mechanic, but if you can take that with a grain of salt and realize that anything that you're adding in may be parasitic, but you'll try to work around that the best that you can, then it can be very gratifying to pull off in your environment. But for the most part, it's a lot stronger in draft than it is in other formats because we have 40 card decks, and that's a big difference. Something that mills for like 7 cards in 60 card format is not good enough. But something that would mill 7 cards in a 40 card format, that's like almost a fourth of their deck. It's a big difference. There's a big jump between.
There is, and I would even argue that, think about if you're starting with 40 cards and then you're drawing 7 cards, now you're only down to 33 cards. So actually, the numbers become even more frightening when you think about it like that, in my opinion.
And the additional risk factor involved is when you are milling your opponents and their strategy is unknown to you at the moment, right? Your worst nightmare as the mage eroding the memories of the other mage is to find out, oh man, they actually wanted me to do this because they're hosting a reanimator package or something that, or some kind of lands matters package.
Oh, I just
really wanting to consume this idea.
Yeah, I just milled your Archon of Cruelty or your Gristlebrand or something. Don't feel so good.
Which doesn't lie within May's subset, but it's interesting. That's part of the tension. A second layer of tension that's engaged in this is you're trying to mill them at a cost, hoping to outrace them, your deck versus their deck on just card count alone. But how do you know that you're not actually assisting their strategy, right? Mm-hmm. And how you're managing and mitigating the risk.
Yep.
Another thing that I put in here too, this supplement when May mentioned 40 card deck considerations, I thought it was important to say that May and I just played a game and she just milled me on round one. What is my thing to do now as an opponent? I have two choices here. One, quit, or two, the better option is I'm just going to put more cards in my library and make it harder for her to do the thing, right? And I thought that was that's typical strategy when you're going round two and you have survived and you're getting frustrated. Don't quit against the mill. Just put 5 more cards in there. Maybe don't even tell them. Sideboard count.
Yeah, and that's obviously thinking about a thematic. Like, what if you even have support in your cube, and you're sitting across from the mill player, and you have a creature that shuffles your library back into, or your graveyard back into your library.
Yeah,
I will add that I recently added a card called Elixir of Immortality into my Fae Cube, because control decks that's something that a control deck is going to want in my environment anyways, but it's also counterplay to mill as a little toolbox option of, I can now just shuffle everything back in, gain 5 life, and all of your mill garbage is basically irrelevant at this point.
It doesn't break the strategy, though. That's an interesting choice because it can still get milled out itself. So I do like that. So it doesn't. It's not the silver bullet. It's just a nice little pushback. But it does.
I will also add that what's nice about introducing mill to your environment is that you can introduce more options that play from the graveyards. Think flashback, unearth, all these miscellaneous like phoenixes, things that you can play from the graveyard that capitalize on your opponent milling you that might not be as direct as, oh, I'm playing Reanimator, or, oh, well, I'm already using Dredge or whatever, so you're basically helping me.
So, Elixir of Immortality, what was the logic? Like, obviously, you've been curating this cube for a long time. I don't think you're going to be at the point where you're thinking, I'm just going to put one card in that's going to be anti-mill, right? That doesn't really make any sense. So talk us through what the decision making was to put a card like that in there, which obviously has a bit of mill hatred in it, but like I would assume is obviously supporting other archetypes as well.
The reasoning why is multifaceted, where the first one is, this is a hate card against mill. You can use it as a sideboard piece. Absolutely, that's fine. It is just something to give you a little bit more time. And since my environment is slow, it makes sense to have that kind of control-y piece, which is based kind of off of Sphinx's Revelation type decks that were around for a while, where they would have Sphinx's Revelation, Elixir of Immortality, and whatnot to be able to control, gain a bunch of life, and just keep going until your opponent just runs out of resources. But I also have the additional layer of having mill as an archetype. So if you want to play mill and run the Elixir of Immortality, you can play that kind of control deck, grindy, I'm going to keep my resources going and I'm never going to run out of cards because I have Elixir of Immortality. Or if somebody else has Elixir of Immortality, then they can use it as a counter strategy.
Yeah, certainly can help if you've got cards that mill both players and you have a card that's sitting in your hand that shuffles yours back in and they don't. That can be an incredible swing on a game. Cool.
Yeah, so we're going to kind of migrate over into the Fae Cubes package. But what's interesting, when we were pre-gaming and we were having a discussion, and we'll talk about this, I highlighted what, in my opinion, which are some pillars to this particular strategy she is doing. And then she has some cards, as we coined them, they'll be secondary. But there are 3 cards within this subset that I felt could be standalone, or just as what I'm seeing is this really neat design you've done in the Fae Cube is that none of these feel like a trap. Every one of these cards uniquely have a design aspect that I could run the card standalone and still move my strategy of winning across the table, or I can actually just go ahead and get lucky and get all these in the draft because maybe people aren't competing for it. But still, what I do like is your choices, but I think it's a nice little microcosm or a miniature package that you have enough to do the damage, but not enough to overtake the environment. I want to put one more note in there. I think you can do this in a mill type strategy, whereas self-mill, I have to have a little bit more robust support. And we'll kind of do these juxtapositions as we move through. Go ahead. May, would you mind taking on this first one? I think I put it in here just for you. It's one of your favorites.
Absolutely. I'll just add a little bit of pretense as well, as when I was introducing mill to my environment, since, I'm the person out of the 3 of us that's very pro-mill. If somebody wants to build it, here's the tools to do it. But the way that I approached it is that I have 3 kind of subsets of what makes a mill a good introduction to my environment. And the first subset is the secondary mill effect. Didn't Say Please is 1 blue for an instant counterspell effect. Counter target spell, its controller puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. This is a perfect example of this because at face value, this is just cancel. You are getting this no matter what if you're playing blue, because it's just cancel. And having just cancel sometimes is just what you need. And when I'm encouraging the control deck to lean heavily into this grindy, dirty attrition of resources, being able to take resources above your opponent's head, because this isn't the same as removing something or bouncing something that they can just replay. It is, I am taking resources away from your deck, so the more faster you're turning through your deck, the faster I'm going to help you go through it, because you're no longer going to have access to it. But Didn't Say Please is a perfect example of, it is something that people will already play because it's just cancel with mill tacked on. Another example of independent strategy that kind of also happens to mill would be Mindshrieker, where it is a 1 and a blue for a spirit bird, 1/1 flyer, and you can pay 2 colorless, and target player puts the top card of his or her library into the graveyard. Mindshrieker gets +X/+X, where X is that creature's converted mana cost. This card is a lot of fun for a lot of environments, and there's a lot of people that I have seen mention how they wanted this type of effect to be supported in their environments, but couldn't quite get it to work there. Versus in my environment, I have so many like adventure cards and whatever that have such high cost, but have a secondary effect that make them playable, that both sides are going to be able to hit with the Mindshrieker for this aggressive, I'm going to hit something, it's going to get stupid big. But it also has that secondary effect of, I can just mana jump into this and keep milling you out every turn.
Yeah, it's got a lot of different lanes. What I like about this, and before I even begin that thought, this was a card that actually cut from Uberbear's Horror Cube. I quit because, and we're going to talk about this, is I redirected my mill to self-mill just because I wanted to transition the lines. This is from Innistrad. This card is really powerful. I'll get over to my reasons when we go forward. But what I do like about this card and this choice, kind of like what she said, Didn't Say Please, it has a primary advantage of, I could kill you with combat. Right? I mean, it also serves the purpose of a mana seek. Let's just call it what it is.
Oh, yeah.
But then it also mills you. It's multi-role, multi-tier. If you're doing that, I chose to remove that from my environment because I want to, point back towards you need to be doing this to yourself. Your mage needs to be eroding their mind, not so much their opponent's mind.
Yeah, I feel like the fact that you can obviously activate Mindshrieker multiple times a turn, and it is that kind of mana sink, is just what is such incredible gravy to me, right? Because it sucks sometimes when you hit a land because they're not getting any benefit as far as the creature is concerned, but maybe your opponent needed that land, right? And you can do that as quickly as, even if it's just on turn 4, maybe your opponent's struggling for the lands. You hit like a 3 or a 4 drop. Okay, that's nice. Maybe you hit a card that they really would have loved to draw that turn, and you're still getting a nice juicy bump on the power and toughness. Maybe you hit like a 6 or a 7 drop, and it's like, I don't really care when this was ever going to, have designs to come down, because now I'm hitting you for like 6 or 7 damage, right? That's a huge amount. So I think effects like that, like those repeatable effects that I've talked about so many times in some of our other episodes, they're so impactful, and on a flyer.
In blue, you're going to have so many things that you're trying to hold open.
Yep.
That holding up in your mana for that, say, Didn't Say Please, but then they never play anything worth countering, then you could be like, all right, well, all that mana that I just held up, I can just dump into milling you anyways.
Yep.
And this is one of the cards I benchmarked when we started talking as the pillars, as in you could run this card without the next one, Thought Scour. And both May and I had this interesting conversation. We've talked about it previously with Thought Scour. When Thought Scour first came out, I believe it was the art that I remember is from Innistrad. And it's with the zombie getting its brains turned inside out or whatever's happening to that thing. It's awful. And I remember actually when during our early episodes, you talked about this card specifically. And I think it was like magical Christmas for you whenever you suddenly got this cool art with the fairies on it. And you're like, yes, I can justify this. Because we talked about this. Weren't you going to proxy it at one point? And it was driving you nuts because you really wanted this card for what it did.
Oh, yeah. I really wanted this card for the flavor of my cube, but there was just not a way to do that with the Wizards of the Coast printings at that time, because a zombie having its thoughts drilled out of its head is hardly flavorful for fairy tales and whatever. Versus this version of Thought Scour from, what was this?
I think it was Double Masters, right?
May, would you say that the other one was a little too grim for you? Ba-bum. There we go. All right. So
You
the
think
next...
you're cheeky.
I did.
I see you. The last part I wanted to mention with Thought Scour was that it has the perfect flavor text, not just the imagery of having the like fairies come down and like stealing the dreams, because in the theme of the Fae Cube, it's a lot of dream thief. A lot of I'm stealing away your dreams because that's what fairies do. Sleep and dream and snore while we Fae complete our chore.
Very cool.
Fae rhyme.
Fae rhyme.
Thank you, May. Thank you, May. You'll be here all night. All right, so we've got an interesting one here. As we move through this, we got another quote that Stuart will carry away.
Yeah, this is the author that I'm going to go to sleep with. I'm not an H.P. Lovecraft kind of enjoyer, but I am a big Stephen King fan, and this is from him. A person's memory is everything, really. Memory is identity. It's you.
Yep. He used to read these type of stories to his children. Yep.
Which is perfect flavor for the Fae Cube.
So
Faes are all about stealing your identity.
So we've got some more
It's like the
components.
thing.
We've got some more components of the Fae Cube, and I'll take over this next one. It's interesting. I think we mentioned it before. It's compelling argument. For one colorless and one blue, you get a sorcery. Target player puts the top 5 cards of their library into their graveyard, cycling 1. What I like about this card so much when I was adding this list, I'm like, ooh, wow. Okay, so cycling 1. Like, you could literally draw a card. This was awesome. Like, when I came across this, I'm like, why is this card not more often talked about, right? This is a really cool multi-purpose little Xerox effect cantrip that also says, you know what, screw you, aggro. Get rid of that stuff. Like, because once you're in a pinch, you're in a pinch. I like this card a lot. I thought this was a cool addition as I was going through your list.
It is the perfect 1-for-1 mill versions of burn card. Because unlike burn cards that kind of hit to your opponent's life points, mill is trying to hit their opponent's thoughts, their memories. You're trying to hit them in another way. And compelling argument is perfect because while I don't like a lot of those, this just mills, that is the only thing it does cards, this one's great because at its floor, it's a cantrip. No matter what, you can discard it for 1 and draw a card. But, like we mentioned before, decks are smaller. And 5 cards does not sound like a lot in 60 card, but in 40 card, that's a huge chunk of your deck just gone. And after so many times of you just slowly chipping away at their deck or keeping their resources moving and just hitting them with a compelling argument to go through those last 5 cards, it can be just a way to close out the game, and I love that.
Yeah, I would agree. Steve, would you mind taking on this next one, please?
So this one is Merfolk Secret Keeper. This is from Eldraine. And I was always a big fan of the adventure cards, which this one is. So the sorcery side is called Venture Deeper, which is 1 blue. Target player basically mills 4, and it's target player, not opponent. I think we should always make sure to sort of mention that because that can be quite a critical component on the card. And then it has a 0/4 Merfolk Secret Keeper for 1 blue. This card I love because, number 1, top 4, I really, really love the burn analogy that you put there, right? So Lightning Bolt kind of being the gold standard where you're trying to deal, or you're dealing 3 damage out of 20. 4 damage out of 40, but as I mentioned earlier, it's 40 cards, but you're drawing 7, so it's really 33 cards, and you're probably drawing, so it's really only 32 cards. 4 cards of that, that's a significant chunk. And then you only have to pay 1 blue, and now you've got a 0/4 as well. So now I've got quite the defensive
And that 0/4
brother.
is relevant.
Yeah, that is incredibly relevant. That is, I would say
thick butt.
that is a big behind. That is a very, very strong defensive presence on the battlefield that is likely going to stymie certainly any kind of like early aggro effect or, anything that's just trying to put a bunch of little things at you. You got something in the way. So, and the art, as so many of those Eldraine cards were, we've talked about this, in other episodes as well. This to me is like so primo with the art. I absolutely love it. I know I've said this on some of our other episodes. Open that beer, Anthony. I kind of gush over some of these. Go and look at some of them. We have it in the show notes, and I obviously want people come over to the Discord and take a look at the show notes. art on this card is absolutely nuts.
And I want to add an anecdote that has nothing to do with this episode. I am so glad I am not May, where the new, whatever Eldraine, Wilds of Eldraine's coming out like 7 days before CubeCon and all that. I remember 40K came out and I'm like, oh, damn. I'm like, is this order coming in? And I'm writing emails like, oh my God, I wanted to pay like $30 to ship. Good luck with that. Cause Eldraine was such a gift to your cube and it brings this just artistic flavor on top of everything else. The next one, I'm just going to read by name, but it's going to be yours because I just want to read the name because I benchmarked this as what I like about this micro package you have here, which is so interesting, right? Is you have certain cards that will carry the weight of your strategy. And then other ones are kind of support elements like didn't say please, but still does the other thing. Your choices are, I love your choices. Let's stop right there. Folio Fancies. Would you mind taking that one away, please?
So Folio Fancies is 1 and a blue for an artifact. No players have no maximum hand size. You can play XX, tap it, and each player draws X cards. Or you can pay 2 and a blue, tap it, and each opponent puts a number of cards equal to the numbers of cards in their hand from the top of their library into their graveyard. What I love about this card is that, like you said, it is that very strong signpost of you are picking this to play Mill. You are picking this to play the control deck.
I agree. If I'm in the mood, I'm picking this pack 1. Pick one, pack 1.
If you're in the mood to play Mill and you see Folio Fancies pop up, that is a backbone strategy of the deck. And it can carry the Mill strategy pretty much by itself, even though it's supported by all these other little things. But what I like about Folio Fancies as well is that it doubles up as a draw card. It can double up as a way to punish your opponent for drawing too many cards. And what's nice about Mill in the Fae Cube compared to other environments is that the Fae Cube is very mid-range driven. All these mid-range value type decks are the king. They are the ones that you're going to be seeing most often. They're the ones that you're going to be seeing people drawing cards and playing their Mole Drifter effects and whatever. And Folio Fancies is a way to get over that. I see you're maintaining relatively good amount of cards in your hand by keeping up value. Well, now I'm punishing you for that. Now you're just going to lose a bunch of cards. And it attacks them in a way that mid-range can't answer.
And you mentioned that in our previous episode when you and I talked about balancing the best deck, where we kind of talked about your iteration of paper, rock, scissors and how you balanced your mill versus your mid-range or against your rock strategies. And that was an interesting way of putting it. If you haven't listened to it, please check out that episode. This next one, I'm just going to introduce it and I'm going to groan. But then in this environment, I'll groan less because it's so... this is a card that, commander-wise, I've hated, viscerally. But, for whatever reason in your environment, I'm like, oh, this totally makes sense. And it's going to be Una, Queen of the Fae. May, I cannot take this away from you. Please go ahead.
It is 3 Dimir for a legendary creature fairy wizard. It's a 5/5 flyer and you can pay X and Dimir. Keep in mind, you do not have to tap for this. You can do this as many times as you want. Choose a color. Target opponent removes the top X cards from his or her library, their library. For each card of the chosen color removed this way, put a 1/1 blue and black fairy rogue creature with flying into play. So in this environment, this fills up two things a party, where it's a wizard, it makes rogues, excellent. But not only that, it can lean very heavily into that mill strategy by being another one of those backbone cards because it exiles the card instead of just sending it to the graveyard. And what makes that very powerful compared to, say, Folio Fancies is that Una is cheatable. Una's a card that you can reanimate. It's a card that you can ramp into. It is an option for you to hit your 5/5 stupid flyer, make a bunch of other flyers, so you have a fallback if you can't mill your opponent out. You can just start turning sideways with a bunch of flyers.
Yeah, and I will say 5/5 flyers, I've done a lot of cube drafting over the last few years, and 5/5 flyers have a bit of a habit of being able to win games. You turn them sideways, they do damage, they win games by themselves. The fact that you've got all this gravy with Una as far as the milling your opponent, this to me, this is another one. Folio of Fancies, okay, I'm going to look at the rest of the pack. If I see Una in pick one, pack one, or if it's pick one, pack oneable, I'm doing it. I'm not even thinking. I'm going to force myself when I see this card. It's just, it's wonderful. Everything about it is, I want to win the game. I want to do it in ways that are very difficult for you to deal with outside of just removing the creature. and just you can build around it in so many different ways. Super cool. And like you say, the fact that obviously being
It's
a creature,
party, it's rogues, it's mill, it's a big dumb flyer that turns
It's
sideways.
one-sided, wonderful.
something zero sum something.
Yeah. I love this card so much. They told me to say it for this episode. All right. The next one we previously talked about this, and we're tying off the pieces to the mill. And as we said before, as a disclaimer, we do realize that mill it's got so many cards. So I started going through Scryfall, and I'm like, there's no way I can do this. I'm just going to do it in relation to the 2 cubes that we happen to be running and how we chose them. Cherry pick the cards that best fit what we're trying to do from our archetypes. But May had mentioned in our previous episode, again, I'd like to really pitch back to those episodes we talked about in our balancing the best deck, is she had mentioned this card. May, would you mind just giving a little interlude, a little tidbit of what you talked about before? So they have to listen to that episode?
So the card that we've mentioned in previous episodes was Fractured Sanity. For blue. It's a sorcery. Each opponent mills 14 cards. You can cycle it for 1 and a blue. And when you cycle it, each opponent mills 4 cards. This is a strong card.
Yeah.
It's a very strong card.
And it has that cycling aspect we talked about before. That's what these choices are neat. I can see where the allure was. But I made that joke last time in our previous episode. Please go check it out. Was when I said, I could have told you that, May, when it was in your Star City card. And you're like, this card is strong. And you had to find that out by, so think about it this way. So it came from Roanoke, Virginia. It traveled across the United States via snail mail. They loaded it up and Chuck threw it on his back and Santa Claus. You get where I'm going. They're like, oh man, this card's really good.
Yeah.
This card was good.
It wasn't until I realized that as soon as somebody drafts both this and Archaeomancer, then it invalidates any sort of interesting deck building or any sort of interesting decision making when it comes to mill. That is kind of the duality of introducing mill to your environment, is that mills is innately hard to interact with. It exists on an axis that most other decks don't exist on, and Fractured Sanity takes that to its extreme. 14 cards is a huge chunk of somebody's deck.
It's half of what you need, basically, right? It is half of what you need.
Basically half.
28 cards.
Gone.
If you've milled someone 28 cards, again, they're starting with 40, they're drawing 7, they're down to 33. If you do that twice now, it's 28. 5 draws in most cubes, unless it's Vintage Cube. It's probably very close, if just not enough to win a game.
Elixir of Mortality.
Turn 3 Fractured Sanity, turn 4 Archaeomancer, turn 5 Fractured Sanity.
Yeah.
That was
Elixir,
literally the only play that mattered.
I want to reiterate, I'm cracking my Elixir Mortality. You guys do not get to do this to me. So we're going to move over to...
And I will say, and you talked earlier about the fact that it cantrips. It does cantrip for 1 colorless and a blue. Yep. And when you cantrip with it, it replaces itself, and they still mill 4 cards. So
they still mill.
Still mill.
Yeah, so back to it was really good in the cart. But anyways, we've gotten past that now. that horse has left the stall. All right, so now we're going to move over to the next portion. Self-mill, which is my favorite and what I've redirected my environment. But in order to set that tone, I'm going to lead you off with another quote from the great Stephen King, specifically from The Stand. And if you haven't read
amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Amazing.
No one can tell what goes on between the person you were and the person you become. No one can chart that blue and lonely section of hell. There are no maps of the change. You just come out the other side. Or you don't. Stephen King. Right? I love it. It's yeah. So it kind of says what we're doing. So the idea of the self-mill package is it's in this interesting, it's got this built-in tension. You're going to see this as we talk about these cards, where, as I mentioned prior, I used to support mill. And then I got feedback from my players and it just didn't come, they didn't enjoy it. We'll just call it that. There's no needed explanation. They were not having fun. And truthfully, self-mill just really played into the original Innistrad Light version that I've now adopted, where now Universes Beyond before Wizards did it. I'm now Innistrad and Beyond. But anyways, I wanted to just get rid of cards that signal straight up mill. Now, I do have some quote unquote, and I apologize, we might call them signposts, but I think of them more as an emergency parachute. Like when you got nothing else to do and I'm bored and we're going to talk about these cards and I can't get my strategy to work, you know what, why not? So you just go ahead and mill 5 cards. We will talk about those, but I'm no longer focusing on those cards that are doing just that strategy.
Sure.
Self-mill is the choice to erode one's old memories. Kind of, you said greatness at any cost. I'm no longer focusing on you.
Greatness at any cost.
I am absorbing all the risk on my end of the table,
Yep.
but for a payoff that I think is worth it. So I'm willing to allow my information to be revealed to you, both of you, as my opponents. I'm going to let you see. We're all going to see what's in my deck. Well, dear listeners, if you can hear dogs going insane in the background, that is the mage actually losing its mind. We're going to go with that.
It's
If you hear
insanity,
dogs, please
seeping
seek
in.
medical attention now. So self-mill as an idea, it's like I said, it's the mage choosing to just relinquish their memories, but they're doing it so that the world can see now. All
They're doing it to get to that one
the
memory,
haymaker,
the one memory to end it all.
That's
To rule it all. The one memory to
rule it all. Yeah, and it's probably going to be only worth 9 points anyways.
Probably. I've been in those situations where I've milled like crazy and the payoff has not been enough
And you
to
get
win the
graded
game.
at a 9. I'm memeing here a little bit for the purposes
Yes,
of the
I'm going to say
internet
you
today.
can get a 10
Nice. All
or
right.
an 8.
So we've
What's
digressed. So
greater?
self-mill as an idea is going to be an interesting strategy, has a lot of payoffs. I redirected UberBear's Horror Cube to really focus on this strategy, and I pulled myself away from the mill mechanic as much as possible. Although some of these cards, as we discuss them, are definitely intertwined with that idea. Some things about self-mill that are really important to know is it's more risk-reward versus like looting or rummaging. Like that's more card selection-esque. Whereas this is going to be just blind. I'm revealing what I have. It's all my poker cards are on the table, right? It's Texas Hold'em, if you will. Everybody can see exactly what's on the river. It needs to be supported by some form of, I call them reclaim effects, something to get back pieces as you choose to release them to the, we're going to call them the quote-unquote graveyard or the blind eternities of your memories as they get cast out. Everybody sees it. Now I've got to have a way to pull back my memories in so many words, right? It pairs well with like things like Dredge and Delve and Reanimator. And that's kind of one of the central parts. It's kind of almost your plan B golden parachute, right? As we go through this. We're going to go through the core elements. May, would you mind taking on some more of these components, please, of the self-mill?
So it's a lot where you can dig for the alternative win cons. It's self-mill is where you can find a lot of ways that you're sacrificing your memories to, like you mentioned, Stu mentioned specifically, of I'm getting rid of all of my memories to find that one memory, because that's the only one that matters in order for me to win. And finding your alternative win cons and cards that we'll mention in a minute of, instead of having my library emptied, instead I just win the game instead. Or more importantly, with Reanimator packages or ways that you can use the graveyard like Flashback, like Dredge. Dredge is the mill, but point is that you're looking for ways to increase your options by milling cards into the graveyard and getting that alternative win con from these types of cards that we'll mention in a second.
How you mentioned the alternative win cons, right? Because
Yes.
they're not turning creatures sideways. They're not hitting you with burn spells, right? And it's something that, going all the way back, we talked about being complex lines of play, complex ways of trying to win. Typically, when I will say, I can't speak for everybody else, but for myself, when I first started playing Magic, I was under the impression that, how I win games of Magic is by turning creatures sideways and reducing my opponent's life total back to 0, right? Or doing it with spells. There was no consideration, and that's why things like mill and getting rid of resources was this like sort of anxiety-inducing strategy for me. And obviously, the more I started playing Magic and the more I started realizing that there are these much more complex lines of play, that excited me, right? It excited me that I wasn't just limited to this one strategy, but it is much more risky. And it isn't just as straightforward, like, obviously, as putting a creature on the battlefield and turning it sideways, because now you need to think about not just, I'm going to play creatures. Now you're thinking, not only am I going to, engage in this really pretty wild way of playing a game, which is to deny myself my own resources ultimately, right? My own memories. But I also have to consider, how am I going to win, right? I could sit here, and I have in the past, I've played games where I've literally milled and milled and milled, and I'm looking for those payoffs, and they just didn't come early enough, right? My opponent gets a couple of creatures down, they've swung a few times, suddenly I'm at 3 or 4 life, and even if I hit something, right, maybe I've built the deck in such a way that I'm trying to cheat something out, it's just not going to be enough anymore. Let's first of all start off with the first payoff, because this one, in a way, does kind of avoid that, because it's one of these, like, you land it and you win.
Laboratory Maniac.
Yay!
2 and a blue creature, human wizard for a 2/2. If you draw a card while your library has no cards in it, instead you just win the game. And that's a perfect example of the alternate win con strategy for self-mill. Because self-mill's issue is that it exists on an axis that either people have to they have to draft the hate for it, some kind of graveyard hate, etc., or some kind of way to keep you from just keeping Laboratory Maniac on the board and like immediately when you activate it, some kind of instant speed interaction. But everything that self-mill represents as a strategy is in obsedence to what we as card game players understand. We are losing card advantage to go through our deck.
Yeah.
We are paying something to move through our cards.
Yeah, this game of
we
attrition.
We are paying opportunity cost from mana.
Yeah.
We're paying card advantage by just spending cards to just mill ourselves. And Laboratory Maniac is, by all intents and purposes, just a 2/2 for 3.
In a singleton environment, the challenge that actually happens with this is as you're milling, you have the potential of actually dumping this into your yard. That's very real. So my favorite line of play, and I do actually support this, is flashing in with its ability that's very overly tasking text to read, is Necromancy.
Okay.
During your untap upkeep, flash in Necromancy, go to your draw step, win with Labman. Hope they don't have a piece of removal to kill it in response. But you see where I'm going to this in response to that while you're in the upkeep trigger. But that's what's so cool. This actually beckons more, as May said it before, a Dimir build, because I'm running a singleton environment, so the opportunity is there, and or some kind of Sultai, if you will, or something like that to really support it. You can even do this in Grixis, but you just really want to protect that key element, because that is your win con.
I think the colors really do sort of separate themselves very quickly when you're looking at, if you've got full access, right, to all kinds of different available strategies when it comes to putting cards in your graveyard or your opponent's graveyard. There's very different things that you can do depending on the color pie, right? On whether you're choosing just straight Dimir or where you're going, black-red or Sultai or Grixis or whatever. That's one of the things that I love about this strategy as a whole, is that you've just got all these different lines of play depending on either how the cube is constructed or what cards get passed to you. So very cool. And moving on, the next card, I'll lead straight into it, is Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. Has the same static effect Labraniac does, with if you would draw a card while your library is empty, you win the game. But as a Planeswalker, legendary Planeswalker Jace, for 1 colorless and 3 blue, it has +1, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So
which
target
has
player
that
mills.
temptation that I talked about.
And draw.
To mill your opponent to the target.
It does.
So I tried to
and you get to draw a card as well.
So you get to choose. I want my players, everyone listening, everyone at CubeCon, ideally, my perfect world is you all try to self-mill. But I do understand, and I can't get upset, that I have given you certain tools. If you had enough's enough, then you can't stands no more. You're going to start milling out your opponent. I get it. But yeah, so that is there. It's important to note that. Because, so it's unfortunate, but it's true.
Because it's a Planeswalker, you can trigger that target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into the graveyard every turn. The fact that it has that repeating value makes it better. So that way it doesn't feel as dead when you have it and you're not able to just win immediately. Jace can come down, keep ticking up, and keep milling either yourself or your opponent, and then just draw cards.
Yeah.
And as we migrate towards CubeCon, we're going to be doing a lot of primers. We're going to be doing primers on the Horror Cube. We're going to be doing primers on the Artifact Cube again. We're going to do the Fae Cube. We're going to do Sandwich's Peasant Cube. And one of the things that's important to note, at least my observations of these strategies, is you need sweepers. You need reclaim effects. You need spot removal. You can't just go straight line. I want to run mono blue, win with Labman. Good luck. But that's if you do, rock on with your bad self. But that's my observation.
It was a common theme for a long time where Turbofog decks would actually have some type of mill win condition.
I can see that.
Initially in my Fae Cube, I was trying to introduce fog with the mill, so that way people can kind of build that Turbofog milling deck. But it never really came together the way I wanted, so I ended up just cutting it and keeping a lot of the board sweepers and etc. because that's just what people are going to draft anyways.
So the next card that actually was, I wanted to add an alternate piece, and I'm going to explain how I added this and then later removed it and why. But it was Thassa's Oracle for 2 islands, you get Creature Merfolk Wizard 1/3. When Thassa's Oracle enters the battlefield, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the devotion, your devotion, 2 blue. Put up to one of them on top of your library, and then the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If X is greater than or equal to the number of cards in your librry, you may win the game.
A lot of words.
I feel like I gotta keep reading. Anyways, Thassa's Oracle, it's like a rap. It's like Grandmaster Flash. It's like, good lord, how many cards can you put? So
maybe you should take a look at Yu-Gi-Oh! I was watching something about Yu-Gi-Oh! In comparison with Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic cards. Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards are like, I mean, we've got Stephen King mentioned here, and he's pretty known for being pretty wordy. Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards are just lines and lines. They read like short stories.
So
it's absolutely nuts how many words are on a Yu-Gi-Oh!
As
card.
somebody who came from Yu-Gi-Oh, I can confirm that you've had to like read an entire book for like every archetype.
It's
just
nuts.
to understand what your deck does.
The gist, as we have done because, again, we're all losing our minds, we're getting swept away as we do this podcast, is that Thassa's Oracle, in the end of the game, 2 things happened for me. One, the art was too cutesy. Second, I supplemented it. And then once I got it, it just was too easy. Frankly, it was too easy. These other 2, Labman and Jace, they required work. They required an actual you to grind to get to the...
Well, they have to be on the battlefield. Let's start with that, right? They have to be on the battlefield for you to win. Both of them have that static effect about if you would draw a card while your library's empty, you win the game instead. Thassa's Oracle's win con that has become so popular, and I will say I am a dirty, degenerate Thassa's Oracle commander player. I have this as one of my win cons. I have a Tassiger Sultai combo deck, and this is one of the win cons. As soon as I saw it, I'm like, yeah, I have to put this in, right? It's a 2-card win condition. It's very, very easy to win with. It's a repeatable win condition.
Did you guys all write this down? I just really want to point that it was really easy for
I'm going to deny this, and I'm going to pretend... Look,
I want to go for the record that Anthony prefers Labman over Thassa's Oracle, and Stu's much more of a, I like Thassa Oracle because... I
actually would argue that I'm not really crazy about any of them anymore.
No,
I'm not really crazy about just trying to draw my whole deck or trying to empty my whole deck through mill to win the game with Labman. And I will agree, even though I'm not taking it out because it's too efficient, it's not a fun way to win in EDH. Now, in competitive EDH, you can always make the argument, well, you're trying to just win, whatever the cost is, and it represents an incredibly streamlined way to win, right? I have won in the first couple of turns. With that, you only need 3 mana to win. And I don't have a lot of the super fast mana in there, but it's very, very powerful. It's very streamlined, but I do understand, because of the reputation that card has, because of how prevalent it is in Commander, I almost would not want to play it, because I can just imagine it kind of being one of those, oh, you're going to win with Thassa's Oracle in Cube. If it was me, I'd be like, really? I kind of don't even like seeing that in my own Commander deck, and I certainly don't want to play that when I'm playing someone's Cube. So, this is obviously a bit more sort of, reputation rather than strategy or
it's
Cube design.
Reputation,
but it is, absolutely, it is. It's about the reputation. But does this extend to other cards outside of just a card like Thassa's Oracle, right? So, I don't know, mate. Tell me if I'm crazy, but that just seems to me like I would consider that very seriously in the Cube design, like cards that just don't have a very good reputation because of maybe the other formats or even Cube itself.
Sometimes I think that reputation from other formats can dampen how cards affect the Cube environment, but it's also important to realize that, like I mentioned before with Laboratory Maniac, in EDH, that can be like a solid win con, because if you're churning through your entire deck and you just plop a Laboratory Maniac to close the game, that's something reasonable because your deck's going to be built for that.
Sure.
Versus when you're in a cube and you're drafting, if you're not seeing this in the first pack, odds are you're not in the deck that's trying to draw out every single card in order to justify picking up the Laboratory Maniac, because at its floor, it's just going to be a 2/2. The person who wants it is going to draft it. Everybody else is not.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I suppose just because I've always looked at Labman, I don't think Labman has ever really had the dislike behind it that Thassa's Oracle does. Like, you can't go too far on the Magic socials without finding someone who's like, look, Thassa's Oracle's got to get banned from EDH soon, right? It's ridiculous.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But I will add that the next card that we should mention for this is Notorious in Modern.
Let's
And
talk about that.
It's banned in Modern.
Take it away, because
But
I love this card.
I do think that it does have a place in Cube.
Yes.
Believe it or not.
Oh, it does.
And that's Hogak, the Arisen Necropolis. 5 Golgari for a legendary avatar creature. You can't spend mana to cast this card. It has Convoke and Delve, which means that you can either tap your creatures to pay for it, or you can exile cards from your graveyard to pay for its colorless costs. And you may cast it from your graveyard with Trample. That is a card that it is sticky, it's hard to get rid of, it weaponizes your graveyard, it weaponizes whatever you toss in there. When you're self-milling and you're doing the thing, getting Hogak into the graveyard with a bunch of cards in there, that's a win con. That is the strategy.
I couldn't agree more. I think this card's amazing.
It's amazing. It's banned in Modern for a reason.
It is
but
banned in
because
Modern
of that
for a reason.
notoriety in Modern, and I think in Legacy too, I think it's banned.
And I am running it in Uber Bear's Horror Cube.
I don't know if
which
it's
is
banned in
interesting.
Legacy.
I don't know if it...
I think it might be
I have no
legal.
idea. I don't play Legacy.
This was
I think it might be.
by the way. I just want to point this out. I want to flag this card is I think it might be really too good, but I have had special requests. So when we go to CubeCon, if you walk into and tap me, you're going, hey, Hogak's really good. And I'm like, I know, in the words of Han Solo, I know.
So, friend of the
is-
I was going to say, friend of the channel, Chris Moore has this in his cube, and I won one game, had a lot of struggle with another game. He has an incredible amount of support with things like, I don't know if we've got it in the show notes, but a card like Stitcher Supply, which is ETB mill, LTB mill, and this is a pick one, pack one for me. Another one, like, similar to Una. I see this, I'm building around it.
Because it's exciting, it's interesting.
Because it wins games.
Yeah, well, I don't know if...
It's exciting, it's interesting,
I think it's interesting, I think it's balmy, but it does to Path to Exiles and all that things, because I support a lot of these ideas, so it's not impervious
I don't like that
to...
argument.
It's not impervious.
But that's exactly my point of Cube is a different beast.
Yeah.
In Cube, you can expect certain players to have access to things like Path of Exile, like these other exile effects, because you're going to probably see it in the draft at some point. When you're building Hogak for draft, you actively have to choose the pieces to support it here, and getting to the place where you can support Hogak for your deck is a different challenge than just slapping it into your Modern deck and then just going to town, which is obviously why it's banned there. Because Cube innately lacks the consistency that other formats have, and it self-regulates in that way.
Correct.
Is that you're not going to always get the pieces that make Hogak go burr. But sometimes you will, and the deck will come together. And this is a perfect example of it is splashy, it is bomby. If you can build the deck into Hogak, then it's going to feel really good to play.
Yeah, I mean, I would even argue that, like I was mentioning, Stitcher Supplier, you mill on ETB and LTB, it's kind of tailor-made for a deck like Hogak, right? Where you're trying to delve and convoke. So, Stitcher Supplier comes in, you're milling 3, and you've got, like, that's half of your cost of Hogak just with Stitcher Supply, which only costs 2 mana, right? Obviously, you're expecting it to be singleton, but if you've already got over half of a 7-mana creature, which, by the way, as mentioned, is an 8/8 trample that you can cast from your graveyard, it's so incredibly balmy. It's so like, you must deal with this in a turn or two, or I'm going to win the game.
And so some other support items as we move through this list, because it was kind of reflect. We talked about Labman, we talked about Jace, now we've done Hogak, and then we skipped right over Thassa's Oracle. So I've given some other support cards as we mill within my environment, self-mill rather. Spider spawning, which I'll kind of breeze over that one, but in short, it's basically 4 colorless, 1 green. You get a sorcery, put a 1/2 green spider token with reach onto the battlefield for each creature card in your graveyard, and then it has flashback for 6 and 1 black. All I'm doing is giving you another parachute as you mill yourself. This is an okay card to have in there as you get rid of your key pieces. Maybe you can recover and defend with a 1/2 green spider.
Spider spawning is a classic. And as a curator, I actually prefer spider spawning over Hogak. Not only just because the ceiling's lower, but, spider spawning generally is easier to support in a lot more strategies for Golgari than Hogak is in general cubes, where Hogak can either be really swingy, when it does the thing, it does the thing. If not, then you're probably not playing it. But spider spawning is a type of card where on turn 5 or so, you might have some things in the graveyard it's just a cool way to get extra value. You can play it from your graveyard, you can play it off the top, you can play it twice, but either way, you're getting a ton of spiders out of it, and it's a classic cube card for that reason. It is great in limited, and it's a great example of using that self-mill to generate a bunch of those bodies and generate a bunch of value and weaponize your graveyard.
Another card that would be an example of that too is Worm Harvest.
It
correlates to this idea. And we talked about this with Chris's Peasant Cube when we're going through and talking about that card as a featured card. But it is important to note, I'm not running currently Worm Harvest.
No, I was just going to say that the things that I love about spider spawning is that, and I agree, you mentioned, yes, well, you can exile Hogarth and now you've lost all the value that you're trying to get through, probably multiple turn cycles. But now with something like spider spawning, if I only get 3 spiders out of it, I'm even happy with that. But if I get 4 or more, even though it's 5 mana, but that's a heck of a lot of value, right? Really, really, really nice value for me. So, and just a cool card, just a really cool card.
Except for its spiders, and I'm arachnophobic, which is really important.
The art is disgusting.
I can't touch
Don't look
this
at the
card
art.
in my cube.
Don't
I
look at
can't
it.
look at this card.
Don't look at it then.
Oh my gosh, it's on my show notes.
Well, we'll move us on to the next one, right? Because this one you said you are planning on introducing.
In and out. Now I'm putting it back in. It's going to happen because I like this one. Let's just kind of start. Sir Conrad of the Grim, and for 3 colors and black, you get a legendary creature, Human Knight. It's an uncommon, which is disgusting for a 5/4. Whenever another creature dies, or a creature is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or creature leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. This card's neat because I'm actually going to use it. I'm putting it back in. It's a matter of I'm at 360. It's really brutal to make cuts. Let's just start there. Like, cuts are disgusting. And also, it's a human, so I can kind of tie it in, the horror genre. I'm going to give this one a good, although I'm trying to figure out what actor that looks like. He's really weird, looking like a Walter Mondale or something like that. It's really weird looking. Strange looking guy. I can't quite make the face out, but it's an unusual looking cat.
I don't know. Hit us up on Twitter or in the Discord and tell us who Sir Conrad looks like.
I don't know who this is, but what I do like about it is it kind of linchpins that idea of the mill, self-mill, which I don't want to support mill, but also brings aristocrats into the fields. So I'm going to put it back in. This card's really powerful, but for 5 mana, that's a lot. But it's, no evasion, does a lot of things, linchpinny. I don't know. May, what do you think?
I will also add that what I really like about Sir Conrad the Grim in a lot of environments and a lot of formats, not just Cube, is the fact that it's multifaceted. It fits, like you said, into aristocrats. It fits into mill. You can fit it into reanimate packages. You can fit it into value packages. And, of course, my favorite part about it is when you have this kind of archetypal cornerstone that supports itself. You can pay 1 and a black for each player to mill a card. And the fact that it supports itself is fantastic. It makes it very self-inclusive, but it also overlaps with a lot of the strategies that you might already be supporting anyways. So if somebody makes a mill variant of it, then it can feel like an organic extension of those decks, rather than this is the mill card, I guess I'm only going to be playing mill.
My problem that I mostly encounter as being curator is it's a 5-drop, and it's my 5-drop slot. And, everybody deals with this, right? And I'm trying to balance it so I have X amount of 5-drops or whatever, and it's just...
competitive slot, to say the least.
It's slot equity is what it comes down to every time. This card's amazing, but every time I go put it in, I'm like, but this card does more of what I want it to do for this thing. That's my problem.
I can see the sort of the conundrum with that, but I will go back, and we talked about this. May, you just mentioned, number 1, it is its own like self-fulfilling prophecy when it comes to strategy because it fits in so many. And it's a big body, right? For only 5 mana, yes, you're getting a 5/4. That's not insignificant. But then you also have this repeatable value of each player milling a card. So if you are playing Reanimate, now you're helping yourself out. If you're just hoping to mill your opponent, exactly. It's a mana dump on as well. So to me, this is just, and it's a lot of words on the card, but it's not super complicated, and it's very fun.
One interesting fact about Uberbear's Horror Cube that, if you haven't noticed by now, I run exactly 13 more black cards than I do anything else. Triskaidekaphobia. I'm doing it on purpose. So while I'm doing that, the cuts are extremely tight. Like, I'm really trying to back up all these different factions, zombies, vampires, humans. And humans typically don't bleed over into that black color pie so much. So that's kind of the problem that I've had with this card, is it's wonderful. And I think they just reprinted it recently, so I got to look at some of the art. to put it into context, but I've got some other support cards in here, and most of these we're kind of just going to run through for the purposes of time. Armored Scab, which I'll include in the show notes. When it comes in, it's going to mill you some cards. I've got one that's more interesting, though, that I think the next two are interesting. Stu, would you mind just kind of running through these two and seeing where they tie in?
Yeah, we'll start out with Forgotten Creation. This is a 3 colorless, 1 blue for a creature zombie horror. Comes down as a 3/3 with Skulk, which is it can't be blocked by creatures with power greater. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may discard all the cards in your hand. If you do, draw that many cards.
So it's not intended to be mill. I know we just went off the regiment there, but this is a card as you're going through that lab, man, it really ties in those pieces. It is very risky, too. You're grabbing a hand, dumping a hand. Also ties into madness. There's a lot of things happening, so you have to look at these components from a different level. There's a lot of tiers. As when May was doing Didn't Say Please, and it was the cancel plus, that's where this card kind of ties in. Mm-hmm. This next one has an interesting tie-in. It's Geralf's Mind Crusher, and for 4 colorless and 2 blue, you get a creature zombie horror 5/5. When Geralf's Mind Crusher enters the battlefield, target player puts the top 5 cards of their library into their graveyard. Undying, which adds a +1/+1 counter when it dies, it does it again. So you have the potential to mill 10 with potential of 11 damage threat over a period of time, right?
Yeah, quotation mark,
should have died the first time, right? The card like this is what it creates the tension of. Me as a curator is, I told you, I'm trying to divert resources back from milling to self-milling, but the temptation is still there. It's not intended to be a signpost, but I have had it done to me. Because when you're playing against a certain package, like an aggro package, and you realize they have we're game 2, and we realize they have no avenue to reclaim their... Why not do this to them at that point?
Yeah, and I like this card.
I can see the temptation. It's interesting.
I like it. It's a 6-drop, so it's quite expensive, but you are getting a decent-sized body and a 5/5. And again, not repeatable value unless you're really stretching with your build and trying to remove the +1/+1 counter on it.
I will add that it is a great top end for these control-y milling decks that care about that.
Yeah.
It also passes the Vindicate test, so that is very relevant for it just as a big stupid creature for top end.
Yeah, I agree 100%, right? Sucks to remove it because now it's coming back, and it's coming back as a 6/6. It was already a 5/5, so against anyone that's trying to put creatures through, that represents a huge body. And yeah, I was just going to say, if you can do it with someone like Yawgmoth, Transposition, and you can actually sack another creature, put a -1/-1 counter on it, maybe you sack that again, and it comes back, and now you've got there's pretty cool repeatable value.
Yeah, and
that's a bit of a stretch, don't get me wrong.
I run stuff like Micaeus in here, but I don't run the Triskelion combo. I don't do all that stuff in here. It's all flavor.
This is all kind of magical Christmas land as far as trying to build a deck is concerned, but even just on face value, I think it's a very...
And then getting back to the mill, I run other stuff so Flashback is a very key component. So we got stuff like Otherworldly Gaze that'll let you do 3 cards and you can mill them out and then you can do it again, flash it back. So Flashback is really important to have in your mill strategy or self-mill strategy, as you're putting the cards in the graveyard. At least you get a chance to reclaim your spells. And then
I will also add that it adds innate counterplay when people are drafting, because when somebody is getting milled and they happen to have flashback cards, then it's accidental value that you just given them.
Correct.
And that can be an interesting dynamic when you are doing specifically milling them. But since your environment cares about milling yourself, milling your own flashback cards to turn your graveyard into a second hand is pretty neat.
Yes,
and I've adjusted this actual environment. So I do realize there's cards that create the temptation, like Nephelia Drownyard that we'll talk about here momentarily, that do create that temptation of milling your opponent. But you got to realize in a horror cube environment, it might as well be a graveyard synergy environment. You are also setting up key pieces for your opponent oftentimes. We're going to kind of breeze through some of these cards, but before we do that, we're going to do this really cool quote. I would love it if Stu could take this away to tie in this mages eroding their memories and their thoughts.
Yeah. So this is from Akshay Vasu, and it goes as follows. Sometimes even 1,000 waves hitting the shore continuously, one after the other, also can't erase a few footprints on the seashore.
That's nice.
It's pretty dark.
Pretty dark. It's pretty dark.
And I'll go straight into the first card that we're going to talk about in our next little section. So, because I've mentioned it already, and that's Stitcher Supplier. 1 black, creature zombie. It's a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield or dies, you put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. Again, going back to something like Hogarth, it provides just insane value for Hogarth. You only need to get like literally one more, because you can delve away for black or green if you've got another creature that comes in. So just a very, very strong card, incredibly flavorful. I'm a huge fan of this. Obviously, it just works so well in there. So I think it does kind of need a shell like that to really shine. But when it gets the right shell, it's an all-star.
Hang on a second. Mill trigger on the stack. All right. The next one I have, May, would you mind taking this away? I love this art. I believe this is
I'm a big fan of this card.
McKinnon.
Mire Triton.
Absolutely gorgeous.
It is 1 and a black for a zombie merfolk 2/1 with Death Touch. When it enters the battlefield, put the top 2 cards of your library into the graveyard and you gain 2 life. Big fan of this card because even though it doesn't mill as much as Stitcher Supplier and it comes down for 2 instead of 1, it has that innate flexibility of being a Death Touch creature that gains you life, and it just generates a ton of pressure from just, this is an almost on-rate body with Death Touch at its floor. And having that incidental self-mill tacked on is just really nice for a lot of decks. And even though, again, it's only 2, it doesn't matter because its floor is so good.
Yep.
I'm not going to feel bad drafting this
correlates to the land selections I've done. So we go to CubeCon, I retooled my entire land selection. And the premise is places you don't want to walk or take a dip. You do not want to go out and your skibbies and go out there with Mire Triton with the Death Touch. That was I'm literally getting to the curator's behind the scenes mind, which maybe went a little too far, but you get where I'm going with this, is the things that lurk beneath the waters aren't necessarily pleasant in this Innistrad Plus world multiverse that I have made.
It's appropriate that Ashiok is this representation of like a mind eraser, etc. And her dominion over this underworld, and the Mire Triton is a direct representation of the sea of memories, of the memories being lost of the people who have passed into this Theros underworld, and the flavor for mill in this world is so perfect.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, I agree, and it just ties in the flavor that I'm trying to project with this cube. Undead Butler is another one I've added. For 1 colorless and 1 black, you get a zombie 1/2. When Undead Butler enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards. And this is one of the first times you really start seeing the word mill. It wasn't exactly then, but you start seeing the word mill adopted recently. It finally got adopted, right? And when Undead Butler dies, you may exile it. When you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. This gives you that preservation that you require to get that quote-unquote lab man back, so you can, or whatever you needed to get back in the game, right? So I really like these type of support mechanisms. So there's some other components that we have, and they'll be included in the show notes. And for the purposes of time and the erasure of our memories as mages as we do the podcast, we're going to save you a lot of heartache here. And we're going to kind of just go through these, and I'm going to reference these in the show notes. I'm going to call out names for some, and then others I'm going to benchmark. And one of them's going to be Cemetery Tampering. Just check this card out. It's amazing. You can look it up on Scryfall. It'll be in the show notes. Really just helps push this idea through. But one that's really important.
It's a great payoff card.
It is. Yep. But the one that May wanted to talk about most, and I really got that sweet, sick art from Secret Lair. May, would you mind covering this next one, please?
Life from the Loam. The notorious 1 green sorcery. Return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand with Dredge 3. What's particularly nice about this is that it is a self-included engine with that dredge cost that makes it so that way you can just keep churning through your cards every turn. But its front half is really good because it can just make sure that you have your land drops every turn. And Life from the Loam is notorious for that reason.
Yeah. And I think, actually, May, that you just said the word that we haven't mentioned yet on the show, I don't think, which is dredge. Like, we've talked a lot about reanimate. We've talked a lot about, other strategies, but I don't know if we've actually named dredge. And kind of another strategy that has its fans and has its detractors, and is, I know there's times where this has been popular. It's not as popular as it used to be, but dredge can be an incredibly complicated kind of archetype to play. Do you guys like support that in your cubes?
Yes,
I'm asking.
it's
you,
on
like,
my list right here.
It's on your list as a supported.
Combines with taking life from the loan and kicking it off to Golgari Grave Troll.
Okay.
I'm going to read this one. For 4 colorless and 1 forest, you get a creature troll skeleton. This art is sick. I think that's from a Modern Master set or Eternal Masters.
I actually think
Eternal Masters, perhaps.
Yeah.
Golgari Grave Troll enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature card in your graveyard. So it really ties in that spider spawning type of idea, right? Then you can pay 1, remove a 1/1 counter from Golgari Grave Troll, regenerate, which is not something you'll see in this cube other than that, and you stop it from dying, basically. But then dredge 6. So it keeps that self-mill, keeps that engine going as you're trying to do the Hogaaks, trying to do the Chase, trying to do the Labmans. It's really pushing those thresholds. Those 2 cards are very technical. They take a lot. They take a lot of engagement, but they're highly supported in here. They also have, they're kind of the pseudo alternate, especially Golgari Grave Troll is definitely a alternate win con strategy.
It was. I have a special place in my heart for GGT because it was my first spec, if you call it. I bought like a few copies of it when it was banned in Modern, and then it got unbanned, and I was like, perfect, I'm going to play this card. Never did. Then it got banned again like 5 minutes later because it was like, yeah, this card's way too good for Modern, and then it went back down in price. But this is a notorious card, I think, probably for that one reason, right? That it was banned in Modern, then unbanned in Modern, then rebanned. It's a very, very powerful card, and I think having that ability to be able to take the counters off it as it is a 0/0 base, and then be able to, get it to the graveyard, then you can dredge again. Now you're getting all, 6 cards to dredge to put into your graveyard is pretty nutty, and bring it back. And I think it sort of fills again a couple of different roles, right? You can, if you want to just bring it in, I just want to fill my graveyard with creatures, and then I want to bring it back as a massive creature and try and, do some damage because it has that pay 1 mana to regenerate, then cool. Or if you're looking for maybe more of a graveyard strategy, you're just trying to fill the graveyard quickly for another strategy, then I think it does great for that as well. So I think, again, very, very iconic.
It's got that feel of, it's kind of like a preamble to Hogak.
Yeah, I agree,
They really tie in each other.
Except Hogak was even more strong, and they still printed it and made it Modern legal.
This next card is actually the one that causes the biggest dilemma. So me as a curator, like I've told you before, that I am attempting to encourage the player to self-mill. Mill is like, welp, and that's where this card ties in. Well, I'm losing, might as well move forward. It's Nephalia Drownyard. It's a land, which is, I do have interactions for lands and way to kill lands. I'm very specific. I want to deal with that. I do run, various ways to deal with this problem. But tap it, add 1 colorless, sure. But for 1 colorless and Dimir, tap, target player mills 3 cards. This card is the plan B mechanism that people fall back on, that golden parachute, where I recently just did this with my good friend Kevin. I built a self-mill deck with full intentions of doing a Labman strategy. Wanted to get him, I want to cast that necromancy, bring it in, gotcha. Well, he was just totally decimating me, stripping my hand, cutting me to pieces. Well, plan B. Kevin, how many cards? Card count, please.
Which, if you're playing Dimir, there's a non-zero chance you're going to end up in control anyways. And, when you're already playing control, getting yourself out of parity by just mana dumping every turn from what you were just holding up to control your opponent is a good win condition.
Yeah, and if you're playing against a control strategy, you're playing against someone that is trying to counter your spells and is trying to be, trying to control the game, they're much more likely to be drawing cards as well. And then suddenly it's like, oh, you've drawn 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 cards through the course of this game so far. Now I can switch my strategy real easy.
And this is matchup dependent because, again, I want to go back. This environment fosters everybody getting a little taste of the reanimator, right? So you are really risking it when you start milling your opponent. It seems like a good idea until it's not. But this card's worth flagging because in this particular example, I ran a combination of Fevered Visions, which is basically during your end step, everybody draws a card. If the player has 4 or more cards, they're taking 2 damage, you're OP, and you're just getting card advantage. So I kind of did that weird, interesting OG Jace type of flavor where Kevin and I were drawing cards. But meanwhile, every time I went to my end step, and oh, by the way, mill 3 cards. So I'm getting him for a quantitative 4, if you will, right? Even though he's getting card advantage. I'm like, nope. So I'm just moving through that deck. Plan B, because it was falling apart. The next one I have, May, do you actually want to benchmark this card? It's interesting. It's Old Rustine, and then we'll kind of move past these other two little cuties. This one's weird and interesting and worth noting.
I mean, I personally love Old Rustine.
I like it. I don't know what he's doing. He's like a weird little dude out in graveyards.
He's a weird little dude. 1 black and a green, legendary human peasant. 1/4. When he enters the battlefield, or at the beginning of each of your upkeeps, mill a card. If a land card is milled this way, put a treasure token. If a creature card is milled this way, create an insect, 1/1 insect. And if a non-land card is milled this way, then create a blood token. I just like him because it generates tokens, it overlaps with a few different strategies. He's a weird little dude that mills cards, and I appreciate that.
He looks like a gravedigger. Or a grave robber.
He reminds me of Rick Moranis when he's running around with Sigourney Weaver asking if she wants to come over and hang out in his apartment and watch a video.
I am the gatekeeper.
It became like a hell. Yeah, he's like, I'm the gatekeeper. You're the keymaster. Yeah. He's a little creepy little dude. So the other two cards that I have in here is Covetous Castaway, which is an interesting one of those disturb effects, which plays really good with this effect. With this idea, this style. And the next one I have is Deranged Assistant, which is just basically a nice little engine so that you can mill a card, make mana. But what I want to focus on now is the cards that were too good for my quote-unquote, they're originally my mill, I guess, environment, and they just didn't work for me. And a lot of these were stuff like Altar of Dementia, Altar of the Brood, and here's the real offender, Increasing Confusion. This card got cut, like, when we talk, I actually put a poll out on Twitter recently talking about what cards broke your environment, and I didn't mention the one that I was going to talk about, but one that broke this environment out the gate was Increasing Confusion. I ran this in my first iteration. It's basically X, and for blue, you get a sorcery. Target player puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard. If Increasing Confusion was cast from a graveyard, that player puts twice that many cards into their graveyard instead. Whew. And then flashback with the same cost. This card was actually, unfun level max. Like, because I was highly supporting that. And then some other cards that actually ran in this was Mind Crank. That card was whenever an opponent loses life, that player mills that many cards. It just wasn't fun because you could support this like with a humans or a vampire deck or whatever, and people were miserable. This isn't working for me. It was too punishing.
Is there any worse mill than incidental mill?
Yeah, because you weren't really trying. It was just happening. So the art's glorious. Everything about this card screams it should be in this environment, except for the players.
Yeah.
And then, May, would you mind taking on this final thought? This last card.
Of course, you gave me the complicated card.
Oh, yeah, but it's fascinating. And this card got cut immediately. But this card is glorious, disturbing, but no way I will run this card ever again.
It's 2 blue. It's called Startled Awake. For a sorcery, a target opponent puts the top 13 cards of his or her library into the graveyard. You can pay 3 blue to put it from your graveyard onto the battlefield. Transformed, and activate this ability only any time that you could activate a sorcery. And its flip side is Persistent Nightmare with Skulk, and when it deals damage, then return it back to its owner's hand. So not only do you have a Fractured Sanity type effect, where you're like, I'm just going to hit you for 13, which is a huge amount of cards, but you can also cast it from your graveyard. And it goes back to your hand. It brings itself back to your hand. What I mentioned before with the Fractured Insanity and the Archaeomancer, this card is the Archaeomancer and the Fractured Sanity in one package.
This is kind of like the grocery list where you made the list and you're like, oh man, I forgot to get that. And you suddenly remember that I gotta get milk. This card is awful. It's punishing. I had to cut it. The unfun factor was just on par with Increasing Confusion. So I basically disabled that mill. Even though it's still readily there, I'm not signaling it anymore until you have to do it. Mills become very much a plan B. Self-mill is my plan A in this environment.
So now I've got a question for both of you guys, right? And May, I'll start with you. We talked about a card earlier in the episode that you had put in your cube as part of this mill strategy, which is Fractured Sanity. Again, 3 blue to mill 14. Ridiculously strong. I would imagine that for yourself with this card, and Anthony, for yourself with a card like Startled Awake, these seem to me like the kind of top end in the strategy, right?
Right.
What do you do then? You've realized that this card is just completely bonkers. It's way too powerful. What do you do then? Do you just say, okay, I'm just going to straight up replace it for another top end of a similar type, or maybe of a slightly lower power? Or how does that sort of change how you're viewing this strategy, because now you've looked at your top end and thought, oh my gosh, this is far too good. What is your process for then how you're replacing that card in this kind of strategy?
So the process I already went through, because this was a change that I had to consider for a while. It was one of those, I guess I'm a horse situations where everybody's like, hey, this card might be a problem. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll take it. I'll put it as a benchmark. And then, eventually it was mentioned again of, hey, this card might be a problem. And then eventually third time it's just like, all right, it's a problem. You got me. But my replacement wasn't to replace it with just another good mill top end. Because the problem with mill cards is that they're either the card that wins the game because they're mill, or they're a card that's putting you behind because it's mill. And instead of replacing it with just a top end card, instead I wanted to lean harder into that grindy, dirtlier mill approach of, we are not looking to get it all in one go, but rather get increased amount of mill per turn. We're trying to increase how much I'm milling you per turn since it's a control deck. So my approach was, I need to cut the top end because mill does not need that in order to function. But it does need its incremental increases of mill.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, you still want to keep that in there, but looking at a card like that, and again, same with you, Anthony, same, I suppose, with any archetype, you got to keep an eye on those kind of things. And I will agree. I look at that and I see the big number like 13. My alarm bells are going off straight away. That's a huge number.
So as we move over to our final thoughts on mill versus self-mill, I would like to have Stu recant the original passage.
Yea, from the table of my memory, I'll wipe away all trivial fond records, all sores of books, all forms, all precious past, that youth and observation copied there, and thy commandment all alone shall live within the book and volume of my brain, unmixed with baser matter. Billy Shakes, Hamlet.
Billy
Shakes. Billy Shakes. That's what I call him. We're close.
So any final thoughts? So kind of the gist was what we got is they're opposing strategies, but they kind of tie in hand to hand. It's hard to silo these two effects. I want to mill my opponent, but I also want to mill myself. The temptation is always there to divert the idea to the opponent, but the cause and effect, the causality sometimes could be is maybe you're fueling their strategy. Reanimator, some form of dredge. You don't know what environment you're in oftentimes, and you have to equip yourself as a player. A lot of times it's game 2, and you've made these final executive decisions to re-equip your deck or retool it to manage what you're dealing with. If you're getting milled, add more lands, supplement more cards to combat that strategy. If you're in self-mill and you see they're doing this to you, then, play to that component, try to steal some of their stuff.
And I think if you're a player, if you're someone that's newer, and I hope we've got both, Cube veterans and Cube new players alike that will hang out and listen to the podcast, definitely I will say don't be afraid of this kind of strategy because it can be very, very powerful. You can look at the graveyard as like a second hand, as again, we mentioned things like flashback, which they sit in your graveyard, but they can be cast, as well as the more obvious strategies like the reanimate. But it just does really create a very complex line of how you're going to play your deck. Things like this are going to make you a much, much, much better Magic player than just, let's look for the stronger creatures or the obvious way of winning. Strategies like this really are going to improve your gameplay. And as a player, I love seeing things like not just milling my opponents, but also self-mill where there's going to be other strategies, right? Because I'm not just thinking, oh, it's self-mill because someone wants me to win with Lab Maniac. I'm thinking they want me to self-mill because there's other cool ways to be able to play that kind of deck. And so, I'm very, very supportive of it, of strategies like this. I think they can create some really fun lines of play.
May, do you have any thoughts?
Curators, don't be afraid to experiment with mill as a package or an idea, because even though it's innately parasitic, it can be difficult to introduce. Try to focus on incidental means. Try to focus on how metagames are supposed to adapt to mill existing in your environment. Are you looking for players to utilize that graveyard? Are you looking for players to utilize and weaponize the things that they send? Consider that kind of incidental mill stuff like Thought Scour or Didn't Say Please or whatever, and maybe consider it as those secondary and primary cases of, I'm planning on milling myself, but I could use it to mill my opponent in that niche case. And don't be afraid to embrace that. play around with it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's a great sentiment to how you both can look at building and then how you can look at playing, right? There's so many avenues of what this strategy can do. And let's be honest, there's so many really, really cool cards that just provide so much support, right? Like, again,
right.
You're trying to mill yourself, you're trying to mill your opponent, you're trying to have that incidental advantage. Sometimes it's for yourself, sometimes it's, against your opponent, but there's so much support out there for so many different strategies. I'm pretty sure you could just build an entire cube based on mill. Have I just thought of what I'm going to build next? I'm going to build the Mill Cube, Anthony. That's what me and May have just decided that I'm going to build the May.
I'd play it.
The May Mills All Cube. The May
Mill Cube.
Yeah, the May Mills All Cube. So yeah, cool.
All right,
y'all ready for the curveball question?
Yeah, all right, curveball.
I have to hit you with the curveball. So one thing that's interesting to note about increasing confusion is that in a lot of ways, it's comparable to Fireball. And we've made the comparison before to how Mill relates to Burn. The difference is that instead of going from 20 life down, you're now trying to take it down from like 32 cards down. And increasing confusion reaches a point of, at what point does increasing confusion have the same impact as a Fireball in your environment?
Never. People literally wanted to quit whenever I ran it. They were done. The Fireball they would accept. Increasing confusion was just, the fun factor was very heavily evaluated, and my players, my group, enough was enough. They didn't want to do it because it totally detracted from the messaging that I was trying to do within this environment. The fun was being lost amongst my individuals, so I had to make a choice. So I personally, as a curator, did not see that correlation. They did not align to me.
I'll leave that with you as the curator.
Yeah. I made an executive decision that I really wanted to focus on self-mill as a technical strategy versus mill was just taking too much away in this environment. Although my Innistrad expanded universe that I'm building does support this idea. It came down to a couple things. It came down to card equity, or slot equity rather. And it came down to the fun factor. Find the fun, as our good friend Derek Gallen has really preached that mantra amongst our group that we've adopted. So at the end of the day, Mill is janky and cute and fun and whimsical within your environment because you peppered it just enough. In my environment, it's just too robust. It hits too hard. And the cards that I have available to me that are on theme are just too egregious. Stuff like Startled Awake and things like that, or Ultra the Brood, Ultra Dimension, Increasing Confusion, Mind Crank. Those did not become fun to my players. And for me as a curator, I had to make a decision. Self-mill, more technical, sometimes harder to do. I could do mill probably cleaner, easier, bigger, better, faster, not going to lie to you. Self-mill, the win cons, the gains you get, the outcome is definitely harder to accomplish, but that is the appeal that my players in my group get from it, is they get those, when they hit that lab man and they flash in that necromancer, and they're like, it's just gotcha. It's the amazing storytelling versus, you milled me. Next game, I'm going to add 10 extra cards of no substance whatsoever. Yeah. But I think in the Fae Cube, and I feel very strongly in the Fae Cube that yours is, it feels different. The context feels different. Like we talked about Una as a card, and the feel that I derive from Una and your environment is on theme, on par, makes sense, Queen of the Fae. But if I see that like outside of that aquarium in a EDH deck, and you sit down and go, I've got this really fun deck, guys. You know what I mean? It's a different feel. So your environment sets the tone. Context matters.
Maybe I'll say this then. If I get beat by Increasing Confusion, I don't know how good I'm going to feel about it. I'm going to feel like it's, okay.
Yeah, good
If
job.
I get beat by Una, I'm going to...
Yeah, you worked a little harder,
like
right?
That is cool to get out. It's a bit of work, but it represents a creature, like you say, it's much more difficult to get out. I don't care if you've hard cast it or even if you've reanimated it. You've put some work in to cast it, and then you've got to do the work afterwards to get the cards into the graveyard. And I feel like that is a really, really good build-around card that is... it's expensive, or if you're going to cheat it out, you need the pieces for that as well. But I think for Confusion, it's just maybe, you just did that, and that's the end of it. But Una,
you definitely
wonderful card to
mirror
lose
that
to.
sentiment if you were to die to a fireball, you'd feel a lot better than you would be dying to increasing confusion.
100%. Yeah, I would.
Yeah, I think
yeah,
so.
it's just the investment.
Probably not much better though.
I don't really have
A little better, but
I don't
not
have a
much better.
justification for that. And I kind of want to end it before we move out to our socials. Is a person's memory is everything. Really, memory is identity. It's you, the great Stephen King. Just really ties off what we're trying to say here is the two mages dueling to just pay off their memories at any cost. And so we're going to move over to some announcements. So UberCube is pleased to actually support Extra Life. Details are forthcoming, but on August the 19th and 20th, we'll be at the Durham Convention Center. We would love to see you guys come out. It'll be https://melee.gg/hub/view/101. I will have this goofy link in the show notes. But anyways, it's the gathering out of Durham that's running a really cool Children's Miracle Network, Modern Legacy Pioneer. And we're going to be a side event, but I am working hard to get in there as I guess we'll be content creators on site. And we're going to try to introduce some cubes, see how that shakes out. Still in talks, but we're going to make it happen. Either way, man, I'm just really happy to support this type of charity.
Extra Life is wonderful. This event is going to be pretty sweet. There's a Legacy 5K, a Pioneer 5K RCQ, a Modern 10K RCQ 2 slot, 1K Pioneer, 1K Old School, and a 1K Vintage. So
People
regardless,
had the feels on Twitter about the 1K Old School.
I'm telling you, that is very, very cool. So regardless of what kind of format you're into, and now we've got, really, we're bringing Cube. Is there any other format that anyone would really want to play outside of this? Because you know what, there's no EDH mentioned there.
No.
So it's good for you 60 card players, and it's great for your Cube guys. And it's going to have some artists there as well. Ken Meyer Jr. is going to be there. Rob Alexander and a bunch more artists are going to be there, as well as all the vendors and yada, yada, yada. So this is going to be a very cool event. As Anthony mentioned, it's in August of 2023, 18th through 20th in Durham, North Carolina. If you do nothing else but just want to show up and come hang out and maybe draft a cube or two, then we'd love to see you there.
And I'll be driving on the coming up on the 19th and the 20th. I'm going to be featuring Uberbear's Artifact Cube, Uberbear's Horror Cube. Still working on the Two-Headed Giant, still working on the film, but it's kind of the gist. I'm going to go see The Offspring the night before. We're on our way. I'm driving really fast and furious from Charlotte.
Don't do that.
I'm doing it. Gotta go see The Offspring.
Drive safe.
But anyways, the next thing too is you may have noticed on our Buzzsprout account, whenever you click on it, if you use that as your primary listening mechanism, is that we have a donate button. It's a way that you can support the show so that we can actually improve our sound quality. We can work on bringing guests. We just want to expand this show. We're really working hard.
We're looking to buy as many cards for playtesting as possible. Basically, is what Anthony is saying.
Yeah, we gotta finance May, so whenever the new Eldraine comes out, she can get those cards express shipped, so you can get them for CubeCon 2020.
Yeah, we're gonna buy the One Ring.
One Ring.
Yeah, it's about I think it's 2 million. It was up to, so we're gonna try and buy that just for for information.
At least a piece of it, like Chaos Orb, I don't know, Chaos Confetti.
Look, for future reference, I would totally be down to just have a campaign to buy the One Ring, just so that way I could throw it in a volcano.
Everybody just pitch in. We could do a crowdsourcing.
I will chip in for you to be the person that does that. I'm not going anywhere near that volcano.
It's not that hard in Hawaii. I've been there before. All I gotta do is really just walk out and drop it over the view. But really
throw it in.
I mean, they really put a lot more effort in The Lord of the Rings. I just literally, as a tourist, went, oh, here's the view. Oh, I can drop. Oh, cool, it's in there. All right, so if you love the show, we would truly appreciate a 5-star review on your favorite player. UberCube is an affiliate of Ultra Sleeves. If you use our code, which I'm going to be using to bling out, I'm trying to get May to do it, but I'm definitely doing Uberbear's Artifact Cube, Uberbear's Horror Cube, and we also got some that's going to be inside of Sandwich's Peasant Cube, all featured at CubeCon. And we would love to see those Ultra Sleeves. Please check out. I'll post some more images of it. Stuff is sweet. But if you use our www.ultrasleeves.com /UberCube, you can get 5% off your sale. Love this company. Love everything they try to represent. Also, UberCube is an affiliate with Ink Gaming, where you can get, that's where we're trying to, May, we got to talk. Stu, we got to talk. I'm working on our image. We all need to have bling out those cool UberCube playmats when we go to CubeCon 2023. If you use this, actually, you can just really support the show. And then you can find us at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod. May, how can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Magic1.
Also, you can find us or reach us at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. You can link us on Discord. Our Discord's blowing up. Please join our Discord. We got a really nice... It's a
Good little community.
A healthy conversation.
I want to, again, I think I did this on the last episode. I really want to push. I created a new channel on there for showing off decks, and I've showed off a couple myself. We've had some people show off some really incredible decks that they've drafted, and just a really fun way to get engagements going on. And it just kind of shows what kind of players some people are and what kind of, strategies they gravitate towards and how they evaluate cards, because they'll talk about all that as well. And that has been like some of my favorite discussion to be a part of. So come check that out.
And Stu, tell us about the Patreon.
So, thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show and all the ones previous. Go check out not just this episode, obviously, but go check out the other episodes. If you're a regular listener, we thank you. And if this is your first time checking us out, then, go take a look at some of the episodes. We think we got a bit of everything for everyone.
Yeah, and other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube is...
Happy Cubing!